So, welcome to another lovely day on the west coast of Scotland. It's flat, grey, overcast. The rain comes in heavy from time to time, but yet again we're out in the field. And the reason we're out in the field is because it's beautiful out here, and it's better than sitting in the office. So, being able to come out into the landscape on a daily basis is something of a gift that we have. Now, in the last video I was talking about atmosphere, and if we were outside the woods it would still be quite misty and it's rainy and the light's very diffused, but in here the wet weather has made it really saturated, so all these deep greens have become super saturated, and that can be just as much of a stimulus as a sunrise or a sunset or some other glorious colours in the landscape. So what I really want to focus on today is the combination of dynamics and colour, and that way we get people to engage with the photographs because of these factors. So in the last video we talked about atmosphere. In this video we're going to look at dynamics and colour and how they interact to engage us, and then in processing I think it would be good to look at these in terms of how we can increase depth, increase engagement, increase impact, whilst retaining the feel and the sort of spirit of the woods here. So I'm going to carry on working this scene because it's really quite attractive, and then we'll move back into the office and see what we can do with this guy. Forest photography is about noticing differences. It's about recognizing things that are different from everything else, and it's about seeing the trees within the forest. So when we make images in here, it's really about isolation. The wider angled lenses we use tend to include too much, whereas a medium zoom of 35, 50, 70 millimeters allow us to be a little bit more focused on what we want to include in the frame. So in this video I want to have a look at some images that I made in forests all over the world and decide what is it about those images that's working or not working. So rather than carrying on nattering away, I think we will continue with our exploration of this beautiful forest. So, Anne-Christine and I have been in these woods now for a couple of hours, and we're only about 10 minutes from the house, but it's the first time we've ever been here because the area we've moved to is so rich and diverse. Now, superficially, the energy and the mood of this shoot was a bit subdued. It was a sopping morning and very grey, and I felt a certain obligation to come out here and do something because I'm doing my 366 project, and plus I'm trying to record these movies about atmosphere and in colour and gloomy days and what to do in gloomy days. So there was a certain pressure. And once I got over that whole I'm here to achieve something expectation, things got an awful lot better, and we started noticing things and engaging with things in a very organic way. Now, I wanted to just reiterate how joyful an experience this has been. Is it a lovely day? No. Are we getting wet? Yes. You know, is it cold? Not terribly, but it's not very pleasant. And And we've just had a wonderful time in here for a couple of hours. And hopefully when we get back to the office, I'll be able to look at some of these files that I've been taking, these sketches in the landscape, and use those sketches to create images that evoke something of the spirit of the place, the energy of the place, and the mood of the place. And we'll look at different ways in which we can use what we have to create engagement and to create depth and to create atmosphere from what's already there, and just enhancing those things. So yeah, time to go back for some lunch, one of Anne Christine's jumbo salads, I think, and then we can get working this afternoon. One of the beautiful things about forests is that you can definitely go in there on misty, cloudy days. One of the big advantages of that is that there are no harsh highlights in particular that can be quite distracting, especially in the sky. Now, on cloudy days and misty days, it's really easy to go into the forest and find other things that are going to stimulate us. It's very easy to be distracted, I suppose, by great light all the time, and it's super. And this is a video about how to photograph in poor light or on cloudy days, dull days. So in the forest, I've made most of the images that I really like on cloudy, dull days. So in Lightroom here, let's have a look at a couple of those that I've taken on previous trips, in particular on the Canary Islands, where I like to go and photograph forests, and then one that we were making earlier on out in the field here. So if we look at this image, we can see that this is one that's been worked already. We can see that this has got lots of dark, mysterious atmosphere, and the highlights, the luminous areas, are really quite small in the frame. But that's key, because it's luminosity that lures us. It's what attracts us. And if we can limit the luminosity into specific areas, then that's very much where the human eye is going to go looking for details. So this image is a combination of dynamic, angular tree trunks and diffused, mysterious mist and atmosphere. And it's an image I particularly love. It's just something I really, really like. And I'm going to show you how to make this effect in processing. The next image also is another one taken round about the same time in the same location. And it's been processed in a slightly more optimistic and uplifting feel. It's not quite as dark, it's not quite as ominous, and it's not quite as oppressive. And perhaps the processing is more a reflection of my state of mind and sort of personality at the time of the processing than actually the event when I was there. Because what we'll see when we look at the next image, which was a raw file, so this one is a raw file, this is straight out of the camera, we're going to work this one and look at ways that we can create dynamics, atmosphere, and luminosity without being so explicit, because this is obviously quite explicit and we can see everything that's going on. And it's really a case of the less you show, the more people have to look. So if I open up this one in the develop module, the easiest way to create atmosphere or to create mystery is to darken it. And I do tend to darken more or less until I start to get some clipping. Now, that has to go quite a long way before it clips. So that's what 2.35 stops under. If I get my white slider and pull it to the right, you can see that that's instantly introduced absolutely tons of contrast. And the only clipping we have is up there in the top of the file. Now, it's my intention actually to crop this down into a 4x5. And I think about there would suit me. And the areas of clipping are fairly insubstantial, and we can kind of get rid of that. We can either just pull back the whites a little bit, but the areas are so small that it's really insignificant. Now, that overall contrast is much greater, and contrast really translates to impact. But if the whole image is contrasty, we end up in this situation where it becomes a bit too much. And what we want to try and do is to create differences, to create transitions from areas of higher contrast through to areas of less contrast. And I'll show you how to do that now. One of the simplest ways of creating more atmosphere in an image is to cool it. And if I cool that overall, you can see the mist in the background starting to get cooler. And it has pulled down the greens somewhat. It's made them also a little bit cooler. So what we can do is we can go into the hue saturation, or the hue, saturation and luminance panel. And using the hue, we can pull those yellowy green tones to the left slightly. And what that's doing is it's bringing the warmth back into them. It's making them warmer and yellower again. And therefore, we're now in a situation where we've got cooler mist and warmer highlights. If I turn off the J key to get rid of that clipping, the second thing we can do is increase the amount of mist that we have in here. And the easiest way to do that is with the dehaze. And most people, or dehaze was kind of designed to be used to reduce mistiness. I obviously like to use it to create mistiness. So I'm going to yank it a good way to the left, add some exposure, and if I just paint through in there, so it's kind of in the background, and we're painting in that mist in all those areas where it's at the back. But some of it bleeds into the front, and the easiest way to get rid of that now is with the range mask and with the luminance. We can just pull in the arrow from the left hand side, and what that will do is we'll start to ignore the shadows. And I'll bring it all the way up to the mid-tones. So if I turn that off, you can see what it was like beforehand, and if I turn it on, we can now see it after. And what that's doing is it's creating luminosity in the background, and what that does is it drags us through the frame. It makes us want to leave the front, the contrasty, illuminated, joyous, mossy branches, and take us through into the misty woods. Now, I process by feel, and for me now, I'm going to probably want to darken this one a bit more, because I like them dark, to be fair. Now, if I've got no clipping in my blacks, so I'm really quite happy with that. A really useful thing to consider when you're processing is to look at the implications, especially of anonymous scenes like this. What is the implication of flipping them? Because if I go into the photo and flip horizontally, that changes it from reading one way to reading the other way. And it means now that the brightest part of the frame is up here on the right-hand side. And that makes it a little bit more accessible. It's worth considering. In this case, I think I prefer it the way it was before, because by pushing that luminosity up into the top left-hand side of the frame, it's actually putting it into a position that's not so natural for us to want to go and look, and therefore it's quite a demanding thing, and therefore it creates a little bit of tension. The geometry of this file is a bit dynamic, and therefore it's a tense scene, and we can add more tension. Something I can do to alleviate that somewhat is come back in with another adjustment brush and pull up some warm light and luminosity and pull it into this top left-hand corner, top right-hand corner there. And by illuminating that corner, it's helping to keep the eye over on that right-hand side. Dodging and burning is basically a balance between where the eye wants to go and where we want it to go, where we want to lead it. And it's a very, very useful skill. Now, we don't have to over-process this. I think it's good to look at the before and after and get a general feel for the differences and what the implications of those differences are. There's more contrast in the right-hand side, therefore there's more impact. There is more luminosity in the right-hand side, therefore there is more impact. The mistiness of the fog in the background is contrast now against the contrast. It's contrasted against the contrast. there's a sentence for blooper reel. The dynamic contrast and the detail contrast in the foreground is juxtaposed with the misty, diffused contrast in the back. So we have another transition. It's all about transitions, detail to atmosphere, coloured, warm tones to cool tones. So that should be a reasonable little snapshot of how to do these things. If we now look at the second example of the photograph we were working in the field earlier on, obviously we don't have the mist and the diffusion that was present in Tenerife. There was no fog in the forest. So obviously the trees that are in the background are way more explicit than they are or than they were in the Tenerife images. But we can use a similar process to try and create more separation between the foreground and the background, and therefore make the foreground trees stick out a little bit better. And let's have a look at how we're going to try and do that. Dropping the exposure again helps to reduce the image just to its luminosity. Now, we have a lot of yellowy green in this, and we can create contrast instead of using the white slider, which is global. Now that is obviously going to increase the luminosity of the trees, but it's also going to increase the luminosity of the sky. So if I look at the HSL slider again and come into the luminance and just grab my yellow and green tones and increase their luminance, we can see quite clearly if I turn that off and then on, the only thing in the frame that's been affected is the moss. Now, that's a good indicator because I can find other ways to increase the luminance and saturation of that moss by using the blue saturation slider, which is going to increase it further. And as you can see now, the branches are sticking out way more against the background than they were before. We can exaggerate this further by cooling the background. Now, we've cooled these green tones again, as we have in previous examples, so I'm going to grab the hue slider and pull them back a little bit into the greeny yellows. And now we have a situation where we've created a cool background and a warmer foreground, and those branches are really sticking out now against that background. And we can proceed with that a little bit further. What I'm going to try and do here is a similar effect we did last time. Grab the dehaze and see if I can paint in the background there. If I darken those background areas where I brought in the dehaze and also use some negative clarity, what I'm doing is I'm taking detail out of the background. I'm diffusing it with dehaze, I'm taking clarity away from it, I'm darkening it. And what that's basically doing is saying, don't look at me. Because if it was brighter and more detail with more clarity, it would be saying, look at me. This is the greatest trick or the greatest technique that we can utilize to control what we're going to look at and what we want to ignore. This is a photograph about a mossy tree. It's not about the broader context of the forest. If I take this temperature and cool that background that I've just painted in, I'll go too far and then pull it back slightly. By cooling that background more, it's saying, don't look here. If I come in with a new brush and zero that effect, and I just add some warm light, a little bit of texture, and if I just paint in across some of those branches, just where the light is already, what we do not want to do is paint light anywhere where it's not, because what tends to happen is it starts to look really weird. Computer's really acting up. to let this finish off. Try not to think about a new computer. So as you can see with these adjustments, by creating a cooler background, cooler, darker, more diffused, less explicit, and emphasizing the foreground, increasing the saturation and the luminosity and the detail in the yellows and the greens in the foreground boulders and tree branches, we're stripping this image down to its bare essentials. If I was to go back into the basic panel there and just darken this image further and further and further, you will see that we get to that point where it just becomes tree branches. Now, that's maybe a little bit gloomy, but at the end of the day, you know, if I was to pull in a gradient and just up the whites in that foreground there, so that that's where the contrast is, then we're starting to strip the image down to its bare essentials, which is a mossy tree in a beautiful forest on a dark and gloomy day. So, just to summarize, we're in a position where we can affect luminosity in numerous ways using the hue, saturation, luminance channel or palette in Lightroom. We can use the dehaze button to increase mistiness and ethereal nature in backgrounds, which will create more separation with the foreground. And again, I want to use that word transitions. One thing to another thing helps to separate. So I hope you found this short processing video of some value. And the next time you go into the forest, you'll recognize that there's luminosity there, even if it's on a dull day. Allow the colors to be your luminosity, and allow the depth and atmosphere of the forest to create separation between your foregrounds and your backgrounds. Also, darkening your images significantly in Lightroom or post-production will give them a lot more atmosphere. If you found this useful, please click the subscribe button, the thumbs up, and the bell notification, and that way we are going to be able to get these videos to you without any further delay. So I hope you've enjoyed it. I wish you all great lights or great atmosphere whenever you're out next, and you can go into the field to immerse yourself in the beauty of the landscape and hopefully make some images that are a reflection of that relationship that you're having. So thank you very much, and have a good time, everyone.